Hello, Gateway NextGen. My name is Tammy Jones, and I am the Gateway NextGen representative. And I'm excited today to be joining you with Learning Over Lunch. This is going to be an opportunity for us to learn, grow, and connect once a month. Today, I'm excited to introduce you to Amy Bales. I discovered her as I was talking to her lead pastor, Pastor Timmy Hensel, that is from the River Church in Kansas City, Missouri. And he says, hey, you need to meet my children's pastor. She has an amazing ministry that is called Oasis Special Special Needs Ministry. And she's been helping other churches develop and get special needs ministry started. I have been talking to her, and we've been meeting and planning and praying, and she has an amazing testimony. So today she's going to give you a little bit about her ministry, but also she is going to give you some resources that you can follow up with her after this training. So before we get started, I would like to go ahead and just give you some of the meeting guidelines. We'll go ahead and watch this meeting, and then at the end, if any of the participants have any questions, we will go ahead and open up the last 15 minutes. So let's go ahead and pray, and then I'll have Amy get started. Jesus, we thank you for this opportunity that we can be together today. And God, we pray that you would help us as the church body to include everyone in the church in relationship with you, God. And Lord, we ask that you would just speak through Amy today, that you would help to inspire and influence us in creative ways to meet these families' needs. We praise you in Jesus' name. Amen. So, Amy, I'm going to go ahead and let you talk and get started today. And yeah, we're excited to hear what you have to say.
Oh, great. So great to be with you guys. I'm just going to jump right in and talk about the special needs ministry that the Lord has laid on my heart in about 2012. And so we will kind of jump right in. So how we know that how I got started was these crazy bunch here. These are my kids that I have adopted out of foster care, and they are the reason why the ministry started. I felt like they needed a little bit more support within our church setting, and so that is why we developed the Oasis. So I have some autistic, so just so you know a little bit of my background, I have some autistic children, I have some ADHD, I have some behavioral issues, I have some learning disabilities, cognitive disabilities, and physical handicaps within my family. So I felt that it was a little bit necessary as we go to church every single week that we'd have a little bit more support to support, first of all, my family and all the families that were attending our church. And the big thing for me was that there was an inclusion piece to the special needs ministry at churches. So many times we hear some crazy things about special needs in churches and how it's hard. And the Lord told me to get ready to share this information. So when Tammy got a hold of me and said that this was something that she wanted to share with the Foursquare, I was excited and a little nervous because I knew that this was coming. So I was so glad to see that we're going to take that next step in getting this out to the Foursquare people. So as I go in here, we're going to just jump in. If you have questions, you can put it in the chat, and Tammy will kind of help me with that. Let's just talk about this real quick. The 90% of special needs families don't attend church. Now, when I say 90%, that's overall, and that is a really high number. And it's disturbing to me as a children's pastor to know that there's so many families out there that can't attend church. And I'm going to give you some of the reasons why they don't attend in the next slide here. But what we're going to talk about today, just so you kind of have an outline in your mind, what we're going to talk about, some questions, is what can we do about that stat that's 90% of the special needs families that don't attend? What can we do about that? What is Oasis? I know it like the back of my hand, but you guys are new to this, so I was going to kind of share what this ministry is, why it's needed, and how can we start it in our churches. So that's just some of the questions, and so let's just jump right in. Here's some reasons why, and this is from the irresistiblechurch.org. They're a special needs ministry also at a larger church. And they collected these stats and this information from the families that they minister to, that the families fear that the staff and volunteers won't be able to adequately care for their needs of their children. So that's why they don't come. They just don't come because they don't think anyone can take care of their needs, whether it's a physical handicap, or whether it's an ADHD child who can't sit still. They just felt that the staff wasn't equipped to do that. So we as a church need to step up our game and get to that point where we can take care of the needs of all children. And then they feel like they weren't accepted. They just felt like when they came through the door that there was not an accepting feel to when they came. There was not inclusion. And I think that inclusion is a big piece of Jesus. He never not included anyone. So I think that is a big thing for Jesus to be that to these kids. And then there's families aren't afraid of being burdened to the church. They didn't want to bring their problems, so to speak, to the church. And when staff would come to them feeling a little overwhelmed, that they felt like they were a little bit burdened. Or this is like very sad statement that they were asked to leave. And I just, in my mind, can't imagine the feeling that they had when they were asked to leave the church because of their child was too much for their church to handle. That has got to be one of the hardest, heartbreaking things I've heard, and I've heard it multiple times. So I know it's not just from the big churches, it's from churches all around. So we're going to kind of try and tackle that so we don't have to respond this way. We can respond in the way Jesus would. So here's an interesting piece of information. 75% of the miracles that Jesus did affected the people with disabilities. He was the first person to reach out to those special needs people. Obviously didn't have that name back then, but I'm pretty sure that Jesus is pretty in love with these people. And we need to be as well. So those are kind of the why I started the ministry, why I felt that it was so important that we had special needs ministries within the churches, because of the way people are feeling and the way people are affected by that, and how we can fix that. Well, hopefully Oasis can kind of be that opportunity for us to minister to the families that come into our line in our ministries. So Oasis actually means something. It wasn't just a word that I pulled out of nowhere. It actually has a lot of little pieces to go with. I'm not going to go deep into all of these things, and I will give those resources to you after the webinar and what all these things look like. But basically it's opportunities. It's an opportunity to minister to families and their needs and their children, helping the relationship with Jesus grow. It's recognizing special abilities within each child. Some people call it a disability. I like to think of it more of just a different kind of ability that we can bring out in them. It is a specialized ministry, meaning we help certain people with certain, if they have a disability, in the sense of that it needs certain things like medical, physical, whatever it looks like. It is a specialized thing. It's very intentional ministry. We don't take it lightly. It's very, if someone comes to us with a need, we're very intentional to try to make sure that it is supported with extra support. That's what we are. We are support for the families, for the parents, for the children. And so it's just an added everything to as we get into church, in our nurseries and in our kids' church and in our adult services. So that's kind of what Oasis means, which again, I will give you more details to that in the resources that I will provide. This is a little video that we have made for our church, and I'm going to let you guys see this. Hopefully it works. And this is what we show to our family, our adult service, and it's on our website so that people can see what we do and what we need. We always need more buddies, and so this is kind of how we promo that.
Hey River Church family. Oasis Special Needs Ministry is looking for more buddies. Oasis assists families in leading their special needs child to to a closer relationship with Jesus. The importance of a buddy is very significant. It allows the child to experience Jesus in a safe manner that might not be possible without adult supervision. Oasis Buddy Ministry provides a safe, nurturing place for children with special needs while at church. It is a one-on-one within a group setting for the child to have help as they need it. A buddy can serve as a friend or as a mentor for the child they are assigned to. Some of the responsibilities of a buddy are really simple, like showing up on time for the day that you're scheduled, being laid back and flexible. Work at developing a relationship with the child and family. Demonstrate the values of the river to the family you are serving. Help keep the child on task. Recognize when the child needs a break, and keep the child and others safe. Our children's pastor said when she was praying about Oasis for our church family, she heard a few words for the parents and a few words for the children. Rest and restore, for the parents to be able to rest in knowing we are taking care of their children and praying that God restores whatever the parent may need. And peace and strength, for the children to feel at peace and safe when being with us, to strengthen their relationship with Jesus. If this is in your heart and you have a desire to be a buddy, to help children and to love families, please come and pick up an application, and we'd love to chat with you about joining our team. Hey, River.
So that's just a little thing that we would show periodically to the church so that they could see that we need more buddies, because we always want to be more prepared than underprepared for these kids that might come into our church ministry. And so that is kind of just a little short promo that we show. And I'll explain that a little bit more towards the end on some ways that we can do that and why we need to do that. I thought I would share with you our mission as Oasis is a special serves as a safe haven for the children and parents. So the big thing to me is that safe haven, that these children feel safe, that the parents feel safe leaving them even for only an hour. I think that is one of the biggest concerns, even me as a special needs mother, that if I'm going to leave them somewhere, that they are safe, they're cared for, and that I can go and, ease my mind for a little bit and hear from the Lord. So I think that safety piece is a big piece for new families coming in and families that have been with us a while, that they feel safe to leave their children. And then also Oasis assist families in leading their children to a closer relationship with Jesus. One of the most important thing is that they have a relationship with Jesus, and how they do that can look different with different disabilities. But I think help leading their parents and help leading them to that relationship with Jesus is one of the most important things that we could do, after we have, made them feel safe and welcomed, that they have continued to learn about the relationship with Jesus. It's also functions to show children that Jesus loves them exactly how they are and wants a relationship with them regardless of their performance. Sometimes in the special needs world, we look at performance more than we look at the child themselves, and that really, I don't think that Jesus intended us to look for performance, because what does Jesus say? He looks at the heart. He doesn't look at how we're performing all the time and if it's not up to par and that kind of thing, in the sense that I think that sometimes we get comparison. Our culture does a lot of comparisons. And so special needs ministry looks a little bit different. And I think a big thing with this is our terminology. It's not a autistic child, but a child that has autism. And we use that in our ministry a lot. We use the child first, and then if there's a diagnosis afterwards, we plug that in, because sometimes it helps for our teachers to know, my son Bennett with first he's a child, then he has maybe a disability of some kind. So I think our terminology within the church is important, that we make sure and recognize that this is a child of God first, and then if there's something that we can add to that ability that he has. I think that's a big piece within the church that would help. And in my video, I talked about the goals of Oasis for just a little bit. And so here are some things that I think that are important to know. These go, again, in more detail when I give you my resources. I didn't want to bore you with a lot of words on my slides. So for the children, just enjoy their time at church. Church should be fun for them and not a scary time or a time where they get, pushed to the side or anything like that. They should enjoy their time, be able to relax and worship Jesus and feel safe. I think that a lot of our kids sometimes they don't understand everything that's going on around them. And so sometimes when they don't feel safe, they're not able to learn very much. So I think being safe is a big thing. And again, for the parents, just to feel safe with leaving their child, like I said before, that was one of the worries why they don't come to church at all. So I want the parents to feel safe as they drop their child off, that we can attend to their needs and the things that they may experience that day. Obviously, and then I want them to enjoy their own worship time, not worry the entire time that, if their child's being cared for. And then the one way we can do that is with clear communication to them, that if the child had a meltdown, if the child did well, if the child needed a little extra quiet time that day, clear communication is a big piece to that, so they know that we know what we're doing, what we're talking about, that they feel that comfort there. And then for the team would be the people who are working with these kids. Obviously, we want them to enjoy their time serving these children. And then it's important that they have a clear understanding of what is going on, the expectations of what I desire out of my buddies and out of my teachers, so that they are able to minister to this child at the top notch. And then obviously we want them to develop a relationship with that child that they're serving. Relationships. Jesus constantly has talked about in his word that, we are going to, when we build that relationship with people, they trust us, they feel safe. And I think that's big for these kids. If there's a relationship building process there, that they'll experience Jesus in a deeper way. So those are just a few of the goals that we have. And again, I have that more laid out in paper form when I would make that available to you. And then here's some assessment procedures that we use. And I think that this can be kind of a sticky situation in the sense that we don't want to come right out and say, what is your child's diagnosis and what's wrong with your child? We have to be very, 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 very careful how we word this, because if you remember, the reasons why parents don't come or bring their children to church is because they have felt not welcomed and that kind of thing. So it's a very sensitive procedure that you would take on as you bring these children into your ministry. So some simple questions that aren't really even totally on top of their diagnosis, so to speak, is, okay, is there any allergies? That's an easy question. Everyone has them or doesn't have them. That's not something that's going to make them feel separated or not included in the rest of the things. So that we always start with allergies. And then if we see that the child is kind of anxious or not wanting to come in, then these are the kinds of questions we would have. We'd have what works best for your child, and then what was least what doesn't work for your child. We don't want them to feel, we don't want to make things worse. We want to help this child build that relationship. So what are some things that you do that help your child? Do they wear headphones? Do they need a quiet space when they first come in? Do they like loud noises? All these kind of things that we can ask the parents that have really nothing to do with a diagnosis yet. If you see what I'm saying, we're still in that that learning of that child a little bit. And then we could ask them, does your child need a buddy? And I think I would wait a little bit for that question. I wouldn't come right in with that question, because then we are assuming things. But I like to allow the child to succeed without a buddy at first if it's possible. And but we always have that buddy on hand in case, because safety is the big thing. Another question you can ask is, what is some beneficial information for us to know? If they're still in a diaper, if they have problems toileting, if they are scared of the bathroom. I have kids that are scared of the bathroom. So those things would be beneficial to if you are taking the kids to the bathroom and all of a sudden this one panics. You didn't know why. Well, those are the kinds of things that you ask that parent first before you bring that. Because I think the more information you have, the better you can serve this child. And then what are some of their favorite activities? We usually get them in with that favorite activity first, if it's Play-Doh, if it's a board game, if it's jumping on a little trampoline, something that they could do to feel at home, some of their favorite things that they do. And then my little thing down there at the bottom is just be sensitive to diagnoses. There's some parents that maybe just found out that their child has autism, or they're still dealing with that. And unfortunately, sometimes we go into shock and denial when we learn that our child has a certain diagnosis. So you have to be very careful with checking and talking to parents, especially first-time guests, about their child's diagnosis. Unless they come right out and say it, that means that they have probably processed that, because there is sometimes there's a grieving process when parents find out that their children are diagnosed with something that they weren't anticipating, or they didn't have any idea that was going to happen. So I just really stress that you guys be sensitive to the diagnoses of children. And now, on the other flip side of that, it really is helpful when you know the diagnosis. If you know that this child has autism or ADHD or a behavioral issue, or, the list could go on, a learning disability, those things are super helpful when you're ministering to them. But we have to kind of work our way to that. And I think that's kind of goes along with the reasons why people don't come to churches, is they want to feel welcomed. And jumping right into a diagnosis sometimes doesn't make them feel very welcomed. But that's just a few questions that you can ask. And again, I have more of this within my paperwork that I will let you guys have. So here are the little bit that goes on with what I just talked about. If possible, if it's safe, and if it's something the parent thinks the child can succeed at, I would always try to have the child included in your nursery and your kids' church without a buddy first. And that could take 5 minutes to know. That could take a whole service to figure out, or maybe a couple weeks. But at first, because inclusion is my big thing. We don't want them to be unsafe, and we don't want them to be a huge distraction to the rest of what's going on. But at the same time, if they can be successful without a buddy, that's just more growth that you will see within them. But then the step 2, if there is some things that you can just see that they're going to need more help, more assistance, then obviously you're going to have to put a buddy in place, and that's a one-on-one. Could be a teenager, could be an adult that has a special needs ministry or special needs in their background. It could be a nurse, it could be a grandma, a grandpa, it could be anybody, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a second. And then the other 2 things, I know not many churches have available rooms on Sunday mornings extra, but excuse me, a sensory room where it can be darker, or if it could have a swing in it, or if it could have a little trampoline in it, something to maybe bring them down from a meltdown they're having, or a tantrum, or they just need to get out of the noise for a second. That's always a good option. Or a separate classroom. Sometimes my children have meltdowns that are so big that they're not safe to be around other children. They're not safe to be around other people at church. And so we have to go to a separate classroom. And that's not for the whole time. That's not for the whole service. But that is an option that I have to make available for children who have higher needs, that need that time to regroup themselves. And so those are some steps and some plans that you can put in place as you start your ministry. So what is a buddy? And I think you probably kind of got what that was from the video, but just a few things about the buddy is obviously you want an application process, because this takes a little bit more than just, I don't like the term warm body, because that's what sometimes our kids ministries, we're like, can't get a lot of people to serve there. So we think we'll just get some people in there, but this really is more of a specialized thing where they really have to have some knowledge, or at least want to learn that. And not to scare you, but they're out there because the Lord will provide what you need for what your ministry needs. And so obviously you need a background check, some list of experiences or trainings that they've had, some age that they like to work with. And I usually use 3 references just to kind of see if they are, what they've done in the past and how they handle children. I kind of just like to check a few things. I have a few questions, and I have all that information as well in my information packet that you guys can have. And then responsibilities for a buddy is obviously we want them to show up. If they don't show up, this is obviously not going to work. Be flexible. Sometimes our kids don't show. For Sunday morning, they had terrible meltdown at home, and so when you show up to be a buddy and your little kiddo's not there, I know that was your scheduled day or that whatever, but sometimes we just have to be really flexible with that. And then working with a relationship with the family. Obviously, you want to continue to work on developing that relationship. And then we want to just demonstrate your church values, whatever that looks like for your church. You want to demonstrate that as you minister to these children. And then for the kids, we want to, sorry, mine is a little bit blocked from all the, you want to keep them on task as much as possible. So the buddy's their job is just that child. They're not going to worry about any other kids in the room. They're going to try and keep them on task with the rest of the group as much as possible. They're going to try and recognize when the child needs a break or a drink or to step out of the room for a second if it's getting too loud or too wild. And then obviously we want to keep the child safe and keep others safe. So if that child's displaying a certain behavior, that we are able to recognize that and get them into a safe spot. So those are just a few of the things that we throw out for the buddies. And again, I will give you more information on that in my packet. And then as far as training, because you don't want to just throw someone that loves kids and they have a heart for this, but without any training. Unless that they've had specific training, I would definitely not throw them to the wolves, because then they'll be gone. You want to keep them. So the training, there's specific on certain needs. So if they feel like they want to work with Down syndrome children, we can work on some certain training for that specific need. Autistic, anger problems, whatever, or there's a medical need of some sort. All these things can be specifically trained for. And I do have a random list of training things that I do with my buddies that for certain special needs. And then I have an overall thing as well. So that I will also be able to give to you guys. Give them extra reading materials that they're working with. So if they're working with an autistic child and they you can give them extra things to learn about that so that they can continue to understand what that special needs looks like. And then obviously you want to check in with them regularly. I would say every Sunday that they feel supported. If there's any questions, if there's anything that they are feeling that they need help with, so that they can continue to minister to this child. And then for your classroom teacher also needs to know kind of what's going on within the nurseries and within your kids' church areas, your high school areas. The classroom teacher, the person that's kind of leading the group, they also need to know kind of what's going on, and for a couple reasons. So they can be a support as well. I know that they're more geared on looking at the children. The buddy is more for the specialized child, but at the same time, they need to know some things that are going on as well. So you need to train them as a whole group, give them tools and materials to read and do extra so they can understand that. Help them understand the roles of the buddies. The buddies have a specific role that they are in. They're not just, the buddies are there for that child, not to necessarily always assist the teacher. And then obviously you want them to make sure that they are working as a team in the classroom. And that is some training that you can add. And that will also, I have some of that stuff information for you. I'm just kind of giving you the bullet points so you can kind of get a taste of what some things would look like. Next thing, here's the big question that I always get after I talk to someone about special needs ministries in their church. They say, what if I don't have a lot of buddies, or if I don't have a lot of staff? How am I going to do this? So relax. Everyone has been in this spot before, and I sometimes I'm in this spot. I have buddies that can't show, and we have to kind of make this work. And so how am I going to do that in my classroom setting? And here's some ways we can do this, especially when you're first starting out, when you don't have a lot of buddies, when you haven't got the ministry completely full. The kids are still coming, but I don't have a full buddy list of people. This is kind of what we can do. We can do sensory boxes. And I know this sounds very simple and very like, really? And honestly, I can keep them included in my classroom if I have them at a sensory box. And they're still in the room. They're still able to, because a lot of times they just need some little extra things to do with their hands, or to do with their sensories are not overloaded, but at the same time that they're keeping calm and quiet if they need to be quiet, or they can keep them stimulated. So here are some things that you could use. You could use a beans corn box with small toys in it, and they can just kind of play with that. Play-Doh is a great resource. Fidget spinners and little toys, cotton balls and pom-poms, those little things that you just put them in a box and let them play with that. Stress balls, sorting items in ice cube trays. I know that sounds simple. These things are very simple, small dry erase boards. All these things are simple, but they also, I specify quiet. There are sensory boxes that are loud, and you don't necessarily want more loud in your room. You want them to be a quiet sensory box that can kind of keep them on task, or at least in the room with you and included as they're meeting their needs of having that extra sensory things. And then here's another little piece that I like to put into it, and I call it my let it be. I've had to, over the years, learn that not everybody learns the same. Some people need to stand. Some people need to sit. Some people need to rock. Some people need to have something in their hands, such as a sensory box. Some people need to be away from the noise. And I think that sometimes we in ministry want our kids to sit at the table, don't walk around, don't move, listen to me intently with your eyes staring at me. And unfortunately, this will not work. And so I have to let it be. And what I mean by that is there's times where maybe they're being a little noisy with the bean box, but they're listening to me. And they're getting what I'm saying, and I'm not having to have their full attention focused right on me. And it's called let it be. I'm letting it be. I'm letting them play with their sensory box or their stress box, or I'm letting them color as I'm talking. I'm not having to have it a certain way. My classroom isn't, at the same time, we have to make sure that, they are not being distracting. So that's a very big task. So my let it be concept is, find a quiet activity for them, for their hands to be busy, so that they can get that sensory input that they need, and be okay with them not sitting or in a chair or standing to sing. Sometimes kids just can't do that. And I don't think it's a means of being disrespectful. I think it's just they can't because of their sensory needs or their diagnosis. They just can't do everything that we want everyone else to do. Have a talk with your kids in class that learn differently. Now, what I mean by that is sometimes all my kids want to do sensory boxes. And they're like, well, why do they get to do the sensory box and I don't get to do the sensory box? So I just had my buddies take out my kids that were having some of my special needs kids, including my own children. I had them go out of the room for a little bit, and I just had a really heart-to-heart with my kids about what is special needs and why do I allow sensory boxes? Why do I let it be behaviors go on? The reason I did that was not to separate those children and say, these kids are a lot different than you. What I did was I was opening their eyes to people are different, and that's okay. And for them to be successful in here, sometimes things look a little different. And that's just a different way of learning. And I didn't make it to be, oh, they're so different that, you can't do that because you're not different, or you can't do that because you don't have a sensory issue or that kind of thing. I just made it feel real inclusionary. And I just said that sometimes it just has to be that way so that they can learn. And I gave some Jesus examples when I was talking to my kids. I gave some reality issues, and I just was real open and honest. And sometimes this is the elephant in the room, and I don't want that to be that way for my kids. I want them to be able to speak honest, but also have compassion for kids that may do things a little bit differently, that they need to accept them as well, just like Jesus does. And so that's kind of some ways that I let it be in my classroom. I have rules, and I have guidelines, and I have things that everybody has to do to be safe. We're not going to run through the classroom, through the chairs and all that kind of stuff because someone's going to get hurt. We don't throw things at people. I still have my rules that all children will obey, so to speak, but I don't make my learning atmosphere be so strict that it can't accommodate everyone that's in the classroom. So that's kind of what we can do. That's what we can kind of do with that. I'm going to let Tammy pop in real quick.
No, I wanted to say that I really appreciate that, because I think, these students already that come to our NextGen ministries, they already see it at school. So I think for them to understand that these students actually learn different ways they learn about Jesus is important for them to understand. That it's not just cookie cutter, oh, well, they act this way at school, but expected to do different at church. It's really seeing them holistically as a person and an individual, and for the students to understand that. So I love that, and thank you for sharing that. That was really good.
All right. I'm almost done, so we're about, hopefully, enough time. Okay. And then kind of the last little piece here, I really want to, I think this is kind of how my ministry works at church. It works because of these few things, these three things. Oh, I put two. It's three. Sorry for the little typo. It's an all-inclusive church. It's not just my classroom. It's not just my nurseries. It's my church. And there was a time where I got up in front of the church and I said, I was real honest. I said, this is what we have, and this is what we need. And then my son with autism ran through the church up to the front where I was standing in front of everyone. And my church totally embraced the situation. And I was shocked about what had gone on. But at the same time, my church just embraced the inclusiveness of different people. And so that, while it was a little nerve-wracking for me when he ran into the auditorium up to the stage where I was standing with the microphone, it showed me the compassion that our church has for special needs kids. And I said, it gave me a great learning opportunity right there in front of everyone to show, hey, this is not just a special needs ministry for kids, for teenagers, for infants or whatever. This is a ministry for the church as a whole. And what I meant is we're all in this together, whether you're a buddy or whether you're working in the nursery or whether you don't do any of that stuff. You still, can pray for us and that kind of thing. But it's real important, I think, that the church as a whole accepts this ministry. And it's very important, number one, to have that support from those church leaders. If you don't have that support, I don't know where I would be. I feel like, which in most cases, I don't know many cases that church leaders are like, no, don't do this. But I think support from them just gives you a it's backup. It's what it is, and they can speak into it from the pulpit. They can speak into it when they're out and about. So the church leader's support is a big, big piece. And the other thing I think to make this really launch off into your church is that finding that one or two people that have an interest or skill set within special needs. I am not the only one here at River Church that has a interest or a skill set in special needs. If I were, then I would be the only. It would not work. It just would not work. And some of those people have had an interest and then developed their skill set. And then there's some people who have came to me with a skill set that I didn't have to train. It was like amazing. It just fit. And so I think that finding one or two people that can really support you in taking this launch a little bit further, so that you can have that small team and then you can branch out. That is a big, big piece. And then the third thing there, I think that is super, super, super important is as much as your church leaders will let you, talk about your ministry. Talk about it from the front, talk about it in videos, talk about it on social media, talk about it on your website, talk about it at special events, whenever you can. The reason being is the more you talk about it, the more knowledge you give, the more empowerment you give to your ministry, to your kids that you're serving. And that's more opportunities for people to pray for you, if not anything else. I think that it's not the least thing that they can do for us is pray. It's like the most. That is like, if you can't do anything, the most you can do for me is pray for my ministry and pray for these kids and pray for the people who are ministering to these kids. Sometimes it's like, well, it's the least I can do is to pray for, I can just pray for you. I'm like, no. That's the most. Pray that the Lord sends us leaders. I had an elderly lady come to me. She's like, I would love so much to be able to help you, but my physical body just can't. I cannot help you in this ministry. And I said, but you know what? You can pray for our ministry, and that is more important than anything. And so I think that talking to your church regularly and just putting yourself out there that it's okay to say you need support, but hey, pray for us, because we know that that's totally exactly what the Lord would want. He would want us to be able to communicate that way. So I think that's kind of where we're at. I do have a lot of resources that I didn't want to put in this PowerPoint because that would be way too much. But I think this gives you a little taste of what some things that I do and some things that we can do as a Foursquare denomination to further this type of be that inclusive church with special needs. So I think that Tammy's going to open it up soon here for questions and other information.
Yeah, so I'm unmuting you all. Thank you guys for being on the training today. I just wanted to go ahead and open it up if you guys have any questions. So again, you guys are unmuted. You can go ahead and just ask Amy any questions that you have. Is there anybody currently doing a buddy system in their church?
We're not. I actually was very excited to hear about this because given the statistics, like it's really sad that we're missing out on a lot of people. So I was really excited to know that this training was coming up and that we could, be in on it and listen and hear and think about some different ideas and how to incorporate that in. And I love the idea of the sensory boxes. We were actually just trying to figure out how to incorporate those, but where to start. So this was some good training for starting that. So thank you.
Welcome.
This is Stacy from St. Louis.
Hi, Stacy.
Hi. We're a very small children's church, and I'll tell you the problem that we're having is that we know that we're dealing with a child that is having some sensory problems, and the parents are not budging or giving us information or even letting us help them by even acknowledging that this is the case. So just any advice from you? We have somebody that is actually educated in special education that's coming to observe our classroom to try to give us some clues and some hints in order to how to just maintain the small children's church with this child that we just struggle with so much, kind of under the radar. But I was just wondering if you had any ideas off the top of your head of how to deal with. I understand the parents not wanting to necessarily embrace it, like you said, but when you know it's the case, but the parents aren't embracing it, what are some advice that you have for that situation?
Well, I have experienced this multiple times. And the thing I think is the biggest thing is if they're not ready to accept it, they're not going to accept it, and they're not going to accept it from us. And so what I have just had to kind of come to the grips and say, okay, this is kind of where this family is at. I'm going to pray that the Lord, reveals things to them that they need to understand, because in retrospect, all you're doing is really kind of hurting the child's development.
Yeah.
And so while we know that as professionals, so to speak, they are still obviously, grappling with what am I supposed to do with this? So just because they're not where they're supposed to be doesn't mean that we can't as a ministry be where we need to be, in the sense of we are going to treat what we see, whether we have all of the details or not. We're going to treat what we see in the sense of we're going to try to make this the best we can for this child and what we see at church. So I had a child, had a certain behavior I knew was at a certain level, and I was like, this has got to be something there, but the parents, weren't communicating that with us. I just continued on as if they did have that need, and I just tried to meet that need as much as I possibly can. And whether they're on board with me or not at that time, I understand that they have some things that they probably need to grieve through, or if they're in denial, that kind of thing. I can't force them into, saying there's a diagnosis, but I can in my ministry serve them as if they had it to help them in the best way that they can. I don't have to tell the parent that. I don't have to say, I am going to do X, Y, and Z, because they're not ready to hear it. From what you're saying. If they're not ready to hear it, I'm just going to pray that the Lord speaks to them, and then I'm going to do the best that I can with what I have. In that small hour that I have with them, I'm going to try my best to serve them with the needs that I see in front of me. Does that make sense?
Yes, that's helpful.
We can't force our parents, you can't force anyone to believe a certain thing. They're going to have to come to that realization through God. And so that's kind of how I approach it, because at the same time, I don't want this child to suffer within my care because I don't have all the details.
And the rest of the classroom, because it just gets so out of hand, and then the teachers don't want to teach anymore. And and I don't blame them, because the child has an episode that nobody's trained to be able to to help them through. But if we can curb that on the front end by providing things for them. And I'm on the phone, so I haven't been able to watch the things on the screen. But how will we be able to get in contact with your some of your information? Specifically, I think it's very helpful to ask those questions, like you said, even just the allergy thing, and then giving them a space to answer those on paper without being face-to-face, that are not necessarily saying, is your child autistic? But does your child seem to like some behavior that we can ask about that doesn't seem so like we're diagnosing anybody or asking them to do that, but at least we can know behavior so we can help them.
Exactly.
And is that going to be available? How will I get a hold of them?
We're going to make that available after this webinar. I think Tammy's going to give us instructions on that.
So what I would like you guys to do is, if you could go ahead and just email me that you're interested in those packets. What I'm going to do is I will get your contact info to Amy, and then Amy can go ahead and email you. Okay, I'm not trying to cause like the spider web effect, but if you could just go ahead and email me and let me know, that would be awesome. So my email is really easy, tjones@foursquare.org. Okay. I wanted to add, Amy, I think just the years I managed some group homes with people with special needs. And then I've also have a young man in my home, my son that we adopted that has ADHD and then also reactive attachment. And I know as a parent, and you can probably even testify to this, sometimes your parent heart kind of overloads wanting to magnify your child's special needs. So for me, it's like, I want you to see my son. I want you to see my son and see him as a child. And so we don't want to put that in the forefront because we're worried people will then have a stigma against him or will not care for him or care for them as much. So I think it's building that relationship, like you said earlier in the training, relationship.
Yeah.
And really being intentional about building relationships with those families where they get to the point that they can trust you and maybe open up a little bit more about what's going on.
Definitely.
Stacy, does that work? Can you go ahead and get a hold of me and everybody else?
Yes, I will.
Okay, cool.
Yes, I will.
Okay. Any other questions? All right. I think this was an awesome resource, and Amy, I'm so excited that you joined us today on Learning Over Lunch. Just to let everybody else know that this is going to be a monthly thing that we'll do, and next month we're looking at meeting with a pastor from the Western Slopes of Colorado. His name is Andy Sloan, and he has a 3-year leadership development program that he does with young adults there at their church. So he's going to be visiting us and explaining that next month. So that will be our topic next month. And then the month after, we have amazing Leonie Kent and then also Pastor Tina Willis, and they are both from Living Way Fellowship, and they are going to be sharing with us on how to get our NextGen ministries focus on missions throughout the year, not just camp or mission trips, but how can we really focus on missions throughout the year. So that's what's coming up, and we're going to be excited to share each month. And if you guys know of any hidden jewels in our district that want to share their gifts and their passions, please let me know. All right. Thank you, Amy, so much. This has been a blessing, and this has been an amazing training. And I just want to say that I just am very blessed that you have listened to God's heart and that you're pouring into these students and you're seeing them the way God sees them and seeing the value of them just entering into that personal relationship with Jesus as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Again, you guys email me. It's tjones@foursquare.org, and I will get you in contact with Amy, and we can get those resources to you. All right. You guys have a great day. I'm so blessed that you all joined, and hopefully we'll see you next month.